We're going to talk about comments. Bring in the comments, all the comments.
So this is a video by Owen Jones on why would you vote Conservative. Now, in the last election, I sort of felt in between a rock and a hard place. I don't like Labour really, and I don't like the Conservatives really. I sort of felt, to be honest, like Odysseus with two options: the multi-headed sea serpent or the whirlpool that swallowed ships whole. And I chose to go with the Conservatives. So I thought I'd go through this video and give my perspective on why would I vote Conservative, because I did feel definitely in the last election like we was back to a two-party system. So anyway, I'll go for it now.
This, I think, is one of my favourite things, which we've neglected. So we're going to do far more of this, because otherwise you're just thinking, I'm leaving all these comments, they're witty, they're to the point, they're really, I've really got him there, and he's not responding, probably because, I've burned him so badly. No, it's just because of lack of time, but we will do this more. Now, let's go through this. Liam Gordon, why would you vote Conservative? That is a question which changes its meaning depending on the tone. So, for example, you might be saying, why would you vote Conservative? Or you might be going, why would you vote Conservative? See, very different meanings.
And no matter what tone of voice you say that question in, I'm going to answer the question exactly the same, being that I believe the situation at the moment is making the lives of the middle class a lot easier at the expense of the working class. So it's actually making the lives of the working class harder. Now, I don't think that the Conservatives are going to stop the trajectory of where that's going, or even slow the trajectory down. But they're not going to increase it like I believe Labour would do. So that's why I would vote Conservative.
I would go for why would you vote Conservative? Because I always think it's more useful often not to ask yourself, why do people support the things I do, but why don't they? Now, I think we can win some of those people over, but we can only do that if we understand the reasons for it. One of the things traditionally, which obviously the Tories have tried to tap into, and it's partly because they are the party of the rich.
No, not the situation whatsoever. Historically, yes, you are right. The Conservatives were the party for the middle class, and Labour were the party for the working class. But times have changed now, and the Conservatives are now getting more of the working class vote than what Labour are. Now, it's only by a 2% difference, really. So you could say that that's negligible. It doesn't really matter, and I would agree with you. Where the divide happens now, as we no longer have a working class party and a middle class party, is we have a public sector workers party, being Labour, and a private sector workers party, being the Conservative.
And they're trying to play that to advantage. They're like, oh, well, we know how business works because we're business people. Now, if we look at their economic record, because that's what, they say Labour's a risk and all the rest of it, I mean, that is a bit of a joke now, I would argue, and we can make that case. They said they'd wipe out the deficit by 2015, didn't get close, now we're saying 2025. They've added more debt than every Labour government put together in history. We've now got the weakest growth of any G7, they're the major industrialised countries. We've got a productivity crisis.
Okay, so I have to agree with him on this point. The management of the economy and of the deficit by the Conservative government has been dismal at best. Now, what I would say about that is that when I read the Labour Party's manifesto, it wasn't really at the forefront of their manifesto. It wasn't really one of their great big points that they was going to decrease this deficit. Actually, they was going to do the exact opposite and actually spend. So you're not really going to get my vote on this point, because I might as well vote Conservative, because it's a bit of a, how should I say this, a bit of a non-issue really, because you're not going to sort this problem out as well. So yeah, you're not really going to get my vote on that. I think the only party that actually really talked about the deficit and actually decreasing it was the Libertarian Party, and they're quite a small party. So, yeah. Next point.
The other thing they make, their big trump card is stability.
To elect the strong and stable leadership of a Conservative government with a strong and stable government. A choice between the strong and stable leadership of the Conservatives for strong and stable leadership.
On all of those measures, they're not really doing that well either, let's be honest. On other stuff, it's often hard-nosed stuff. On law and order, for example, the Tories often posture there. Problem with that now is they've cut 20,000 police officers, and Labour are arguing to have an increase in 10,000 police officers, and have made it clear that Theresa May has put this country at risk.
You don't deal with terrorism by cutting police numbers. You deal with it by making sure the police are properly there and properly resourced. You also deal with it by looking at the root causes, looking at the funding that goes into terror groups, and building a society where there's a community cohesion rather than a community division.
No, this is not the situation whatsoever. I remember the video going around Facebook which had police sirens through it, and it was saying crime's going up year by year. And when you actually looked in the report, because I did actually flip through the report, I didn't have to flip for that long, where it says you cannot make year-by-year comparisons because the data, or the way they collected data, has changed, and they actually started to take in computer crimes like hacking and computer fraud and credit card fraud and stuff like that into account, where they hadn't the year before. So actually, when it came to these police and needing 10,000 more police, which they couldn't actually come up with figures of how they was actually going to support these 10,000 police officers, they actually just hoodwinked the public. Now, the way you stop terrorism is by having a sensible immigration system, and you can only get that with actually coming out of the European Union, which I think was the Conservatives' main strong point. And it's something that the Labour government at the moment has actually started to backtrack on. So, yeah, I think the Conservatives win the security situation. So that's why I would vote for them on this issue.
The other issues traditionally often been immigration and often scapegoating migrants for the problems caused by those at the top.
No, I really loved it how you said that then, how it just went really, really fast. You just spoke it and just got it out as fast as you possibly can, just to the next issue, because that's what Labour advocates really want. They just want to just say about immigration really, really fast, and let's just go on to the next issue. But it's not like it's not an objective fact that immigration does make it harder for the working class. Now, there was a report done by the Bank of England in 2015 that showed that on a holistic perspective, it doesn't actually show that immigration makes it harder for the native British worker. But when you start to break it down into subcategories and you actually look at the poorer people in this country, it actually shows that yes, it does actually make life harder in the way that it creates more competition in the workplace and actually decreases the pay for the poorer people. It's also, this is the point that which I like to make, is that when you increase the amount of workers that come into the job market, you also have to increase the number of jobs, or it's seen as jobs are decreasing because it actually decreases the percentage of jobs available for the workers to actually take. Now, this has actually happened in the high skill field. It's actually increased even more than the demand of this, and I will go into that a bit later, but it's not happened in the low skill field. And the reason for this is because when you employ, or when an employer employs a low skilled migrant worker which is willing to work for less, it frees them up more money where they can then employ a high skilled worker. Now, we're saying that, could you please stop scapegoating the people at the top for the immoral behaviour and the immoral policies that are enforced by the politicians and the bureaucrats in the European Union. Thank you.
I think now Labour, because they've got an argument about, well, the people at the top are really responsible.
They don't have an argument, do they, Owen? They just have a claim, which they can't prove because it's not true. The other side have hard physical data to back up their arguments. This is something you don't. This won't win the working class over because they live in the thick viscosity of the impact that mass immigration has caused. When their wages drop in direct correlation with immigrants coming into their environment, they will put two and two together. When they see waiting lists go up in direct correlation with immigrants coming into their environment, they will put two and two together again. So these claims coming from Labour sophists will not work because it's too hard to believe. The way to win these people over is to accept mass immigration for what it is. Well-off people bringing in poor people to make themselves feel good inside, at the disbenefit of the poor people already here. Yes, you may get a warm feeling inside, but it impacts the poor.
I think that's really beginning to seep in. But in any case, we've got to understand, there are still people who think they're voting Tory because of economic credibility, for reasons of stability, on things like law and order and immigration, hard-nosed reasons. You might not like those reasons. I disagree with them profoundly, but we do have to get into their heads and understand them.
Yeah, but that will never happen, Owen, if you just cared about feelings rather than facts.
Empathy